Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can check them out at filmmakeru.com. Every week we go live Friday at 2 p.m. with a film professional to chat and give you a chance to ask questions. Today I'm joined by Michael Tyburski, director of The Sound of Silence, which premiered at Sundance in 2019 and is currently working on his new project. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Just unmuting. Thanks for having me. Good to
No
be
problem.
here.
My first question, this isn't very film oriented, but when I was reading up on you, it says that you're from Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. And I would like to know the story behind that name, because there's definitely a story behind that. Do you know how it got that?
No, that's a good question. Yeah, it's the Northeast Kingdom. I like to refer to it's a lot more of a romantic name of an area than just northern Vermont, where it's also kind of known poetically as the North Country, but that gets confusing with northern Minnesota, which also kind of goes by that naming. But I believe it was the region was named by one of or kind of given that nickname by one of the governors of the state in the 70s, as this kind of, it's a poetic sort of rural, unique part of the state. Vermont's very rural inherently, but the Northeast Kingdom, where I grew up, I think it's a series of 5 or 6 towns that the total population of that region of the state is less than 30,000 people, and the town I grew up in was less than 5,000 people. So it's very, very small. Just kind of gives it that remoteness.
I was hoping that someone declared a kingdom in the States to see what would happen. How did you get into filmmaking then, from a town of 5,000 people?
Yeah. Certainly, it wasn't something everyone was doing in Vermont, so it was kind of an anomaly at the time. But I don't, I think I had an interest in movies at a young age. I had, parents who would bring home the most interesting things they could find on VHS from the local video store, which wasn't usually that obscure. But I think I remember really, being attracted to movies, and specifically trying to understand how they were made. And the process has always been something that's been interesting to me. And I think, my start in terms of production happened when I was about 14. I had a cable access television show. I don't know if they have cable access in Canada, but
yeah, we do. That's how Tom Green got his start.
That's right. Yeah. So interestingly, that's of course, Tom Green this was in the late 90s, and Tom Green was a big inspiration to me at a young age. This is when I still went by Mike, and the name of the show was The Mike Tyburski Show. And it had I liked the kind of late night setup, but this was all done, from the basement of the log cabin that I grew up in the woods. And I think looking back at it, it was, I was trying to create the illusion of having a 3-camera setup, in my basement, and also being the host and having a crew of just me. So I think I was only appearing on camera by default as kind of a personality, but it was, I think fundamental in my, just interest in how things work, how I'm going to light something, how I'm going to start editing. And then I would put those together on, I had 2 VCRs that were connected together, and would cut the show, and it would air every Tuesday night at 8:30 on Channel 14. But I feel like now I'm glad that I was doing that then, because if I was 14 now, I would probably have a YouTube channel or something. And fortunately, there's no real remnants of this other than, some dusty VHS tapes that are still at my folks' home. So it's not digitized for the modern times.
Now we have a question here from Richard Farmer. He says, "I'm an indie filmmaker who's interested in entering a short film into Sundance and other festivals. Can you offer any tips or advice?"
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think everyone wants to premiere a short at Sundance. That's kind of the gold standard, in my opinion. I had one short film play there in 2013, and it wasn't the first that I had submitted. I submitted a short, I think, in a previous iteration of the festival. But I think what they tell you, which is probably still the same, is people warn you that you want to have a short film, 5 minutes or so, and there's a few other rules, but I submitted a cut of Palimpsest was the short, and it was 17 minutes, I want to say. And and we applied to the late deadline. I think that was the other thing. And we didn't know anybody. And I think everyone kind of assumes that there's these gatekeepers who have connections to something, and we didn't have any stars in our short. So we had everything seemingly going against us. But that said, the film got in, and I credit that to the programming team at Sundance, all of which I mostly know now pretty personally from being at the festival a few times. And they're very good. They watch every single film. So the only advice is just make the best film you can, tell the story the way you want to tell it, and don't worry about, I suppose, or don't get too hung up on the so-called rules of what people tell you to do.
Yeah, like I heard, because my wife used to work at TIFF, and they were always struggling in the shorts. They always wanted it short too, right? Because they said the biggest hurdle was people would hand in a 40-minute short, and they're like, well, our shorts program is an hour long, and so you've taken up 40 minutes. So they're like, give us shorts.
Yeah, I mean, that said, it's obviously they're trying to slot you into a program of other shorts. So certainly a 40-minute short is going to take up a lot of real estate in that. But I think there's a balance, and I don't know. I think I just had decided at the time, with the people I made the film with, that running time, even though it was long, was the best way to tell the story, and that just is how it worked out. But just make the film the way you want to make it. And there's lots of festivals. There's lots of way to see short films now too, which is also very exciting.
Well, and you mentioned the short film that got in. I can never pronounce the name properly. I trip over Palimpsest.
It's part of the reason why the feature has a different name, even though it's adapted from that. It's Palimpsest, which is it's an old-fashioned word from the Middle Ages that isn't in all dictionaries anymore. But Ben Neighbors, who I wrote that with, and also the feature, we just like it. We like the metaphor with the definition of that word. But yeah, hard to pronounce, and a lot of people don't know what it means, so it gets a little lost.
Where did you get the idea for this film?
With the short film?
Yeah, the initial one.
Yeah, so that came from Ben, who had this idea of kind of an odd therapist of sorts who worked with sound, and he had a short story sketch that. At the time, this character had a few different professions, actually, and did a few different odd jobs. And I think I was most attracted to this one of someone kind of coming into your home and being able to diagnose all of your mental health issues by way of sound. And that was fascinating. And I think from that kind of character sketch, I like to think that I could picture, this gentleman wearing a tweed blazer and carrying a briefcase. And he reminded me of a certain sort of a character you would see in New York City and kind of be curious about, or at least I would. And I think, with all the work I make, and specifically that one, I'm always, I'm interested in, on the surface, it can have kind of a quirky odd job or something in that case, but it's what makes this character tick? Who is this person? And that's when we adapt that into the feature. We just have this palette of we have this conduit in which to tell this story that we wanted to dive into, but it was all kind of based on that same character.
Well, it was such an interesting, like, watching the feature was really interesting, and I'm going to use this word, and I don't mean it to come across as like a pun, but it's going to. It felt also like there's this great character development, everything, but it also felt like a tone piece. Like we were sitting in moments with this character. So when you're writing something like that, how are you visualizing this? How are you sort of coming up with the sort of tone of the piece?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question too, because I think about tone a lot, and I think about it usually before even dialogue sometimes, or before I know what story I'm telling. It's just, but I usually have kind of a gut instinct on what I want the tone of something to be, or at least what I want to experiment with. And in this case, we developed the script over more years than I'd like to admit, to be honest, not in a sustainable way. But after having this script and so many kind of evolutions of it on paper, I knew that I wanted to start listening to it. And this kind of dovetails into talking about tone. I had once Peter Sarsgaard came on board. Him and I sat down and we recorded the script. So he has it's his movie in a way. So I knew that just hearing his voice and hearing my screen direction, and in that case reading every other character in the film, just with him on it, I'd be able to listen to it and start feeling the film in a different way than I would on paper, and just from being tired of reading it, I suppose, after that many drafts. But that kind of radio play version of the movie was a tool that I could listen to and eventually put into editing software as a timeline, and start kind of feeling out how long things are going to take. And in this case, there was a practical sense to it too, of just kind of killing darlings ahead of time, because it's a micro budget feature in a way, and we have a limited time to do it. So finding areas that maybe are repeats, or maybe just are stalling things from moving along. But when I had the element of the dialogue and adding some kind of images, start bringing in sort of sounds. In this case of this movie is very important, and music score, and start kind of feeling out what I want the tone of certain areas of the film to be. So that's where it starts. But that said, I also it's not a blueprint for the movie. I throw that all away, and I don't look at it once we're making the movie, and it's not something that I actually ever refer to again. But it's just, it helps me start to feel like, okay, this is going to work, and have maybe a little bit more confidence going to set once we're shooting, to be like, well, I know I could hear this at one point, so now I have a little bit more room to play, if that makes sense.
Well, it's interesting because I don't think I've heard of someone sort of essentially recording a radio play, like you said. So how did Peter's interpretation of the script change your story?
Well, I don't think it changed the story at all. The story remained the same, but certainly when an actor voices the words that you have written, they're going to sound completely different. But it's usually very exciting, and that's the part of the process that I, frankly, get off on most. It's just suddenly it's new, it's original. You can hear things in your head, and I can start hearing how I might imagine someone's going to interpret in my head, but on the day it's completely different. And I as a director try to just embrace that as much as I can, and play with it. But it's always filmmaking. And this was my first feature, and I want to implement these practices into everything I make from here on out. But films are a living organism. They're if you are too kind of rigid and have an idea ahead of time of exactly how something's going to be, I feel like you can make something that works, but maybe doesn't have its full potential that you really find on the day. So I try to incorporate improvisation into the process as much as possible. I think that's key. But it doesn't mean you can't be exacting and have certain details that you want to come across. But just being able to hear something come out of an actor's the way that they're going to say it and perform it, and be willing to kind of sit back in a way and let that inform how things are going to progress. So not change the story, but maybe play with just the sense of the scene, or what works best.
Well, and I was thinking, I guess I shouldn't have said change the story. I was thinking, like that's going to have a huge impact on the character you've been working on, right? Because you've got that visual like, this is who I'm seeing, and all of a sudden you have someone voicing him or her in terms of the Rashida. But like, how do you work with that material from the actor? Do you like to I guess, like, did you take it back and then rewrite the script again, or did you just use that as your template to?
Yeah, I mean, you're constantly rewriting. It's like, we have the script there, and there's there's a continuity person and producers who are constantly trying to kind of make sure you're staying on track. But I like to be adaptable like that, and I mean, I find that as much as you can work on the script and tweak it and make sure that every all the punctuation is perfect. I don't so much pay attention to that on the day, because I want to understand the adaptation of it that happens when you have performers. And it's I think usually I find myself, when we get to the edit, if there's time on a day of shooting, some actors like to do what they refer to as kind of a loose take, and you're playing a little bit more. And I find, even though those things can sometimes seem wild and they can go different directions, I find we're pulling from those in the edit more and more, just because they're frankly just more organic. They're reacting rather than performing in the kind of the broadest sense of that idea.
How do you because you're essentially you're living the dream. A lot of people want to make films, but you're also balancing that with a career as a commercial director. So how do you find that balance so that you can tell your stories, but also work in this? Because I always found commercials to be this really creative space where you're pushing boundaries in some sense, coming up with unique ideas, but it's a different way of storytelling. So I'm wondering how you find that creative balance.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I haven't directed a commercial in some time, mainly just because of the state of the world right now. But that said, I mean, the practice, the way I usually like to integrate it and think about it, is that it's commercials, and this is something that really isn't like client friendly, I suppose, in that world, but it's I feel that they're a room to experiment in a way, and meaning that I'm experimenting with new collaborators, new cinematographers, new production designers, new talent that I want to work with in a very limited sense, because commercials, usually kind of in and out in under a month, and with a feature. I mean, that's a feature, or longer form storytelling is kind of what it's all about for me. It's all practice in a way, it's all just I think I'll always be growing as a filmmaker, and anything I can do to just sharpen my skills and to play with new lenses and understand kind of how technology can enhance storytelling in ways. Commercial budgets usually give you that luxury. So I've always kind of seen commercials as it's, the most important thing is telling the story and creating something that is for that purpose. But coming from a filmmaking background, I'm just using it as a palette to have a budget, to have a little bit more room to play. And that doesn't mean you're not coming in and making the work, but it's just my own kind of philosophy that helps make the longer form work better in a way, hopefully.
Now, when you were directing The Sound of Silence, was there a scene or a moment or a storyline or thread that you found you were struggling with, but eventually you overcame?
Gosh, I don't know if there were, there's, I think I felt very good when we were making the movie, of confident that we had it all. But it was also, we were telling a very, a nuanced story, I suppose, something that isn't, is hard to kind of condense to a log line, and was maybe, informed why it took so long to kind of get this movie off the ground. And fortunately, we found kind of like-minded collaborators who wanted to tell kind of a very niche story. But it's so much of it is in subtle things in performance that you find in the edits, and just being able to be willing to explore that and, rewrite in a way in the editing process. At the end of the day, we made the film that we set out to make and that we wrote, but at the same time, it's what I was talking about earlier. You let kind of performances, and you let the tonal shifts that happen live when you make the film inform the best story that you have, and the best film that you have in that way.
Interesting. So in the film, the character dynamic between Rashida Jones and Peter Sarsgaard is quite, I guess, quite subtle, like you were saying. So how did you work with that with the actors to sort of get that level made in? Like, what's your approach with the actors?
Well, I mean, I was fortunate on my first feature to work with such great stars in a way. Both Peter and Rashida have been working for years, and can do a lot of different tones. I think they're both, Peter especially I describe him as a chameleon a lot, because I really feel like he can disappear into a character in a great way. And I think what I wanted to see from both of them was essentially something I hadn't seen in really either of them do, in a not in a big way, but in a feature way before. Rashida's obviously an actress who's known more for comedy, and this film isn't. I wouldn't describe as comedy. There's funny tonal moments, but I really, I had a conversation with her before we made the film. I wanted to kind of pull back and just tone everything down. And she's, because I saw that she had great dramatic chops, and I think there's a lot there that she's really strong at. And so I think overall, not just with the performance of the film, everything, I was just trying to pull back and be more restrained. The most important thing was I wanted this film to feel like it was coming from the point of view of the Peter character, who's a very kind of restrained, methodical character who hears the world in a certain way. And those are the things that I wanted to be loud, literally, like the sounds in the movie, and his perspective of this kind of heightened hearing. And everything else, I just wanted to dial back. And even with the same, the way we shot the film, Eric Lynn was the cinematographer, our conversations were about kind of, well, how can we just keep the camera locked down for most of the movie? Eventually, I was persuaded to add some movement into the film, which is necessary. But we were kind of, that was kind of our MO, was just to let everything, not gloss anything up, just pull back. Performances are restrained, the shooting style is restrained, so that we were leaving negative space and room for the unseen character of sound.
Which is interesting, because the sound design is so it's like, I want to say it's quiet, but it's there. Like, it's hard. I don't know how to describe the sound design, because it's like, for most of the film, except for when he starts to get that tone where he's trying to hear something, he's getting the tone, but like, it's so subtle in many of the scenes. It's really nice. And
I mean,
in a weird way.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, you essentially don't want to hear sound design. Yeah, I mean, you don't want to notice it. That is to say, and I think I was fortunate where I worked with kind of a dual sound team, two sound designers who work in tandem, but had a very specific approach to the film, where both of them kind of listen to different things and experiment with different things, and then present that, and then they swap roles. So I just really appreciated that kind of fresh approach to, a very technical part of the process, that unfortunately there's not a lot of consideration is usually given to sound in a lot of movies. It's kind of left for last. It's not a big budget item. But that was always important to us from the beginning is, we were talking with sound designers before we even cast the film. This was something we were doing at the script stage. And so, it was, and not only because we were telling a story about sound, but I think it's this, I used to say this a lot when we were showing the film at festivals, but when you walk out of a movie theater, people describe seeing the film, but you also just heard a film too. And I think it's this undervalued tool and storytelling part of the process that isn't given its due all the time.
Now you're just revving up to do your next film. So what did you learn on The Sound of Silence that you're going to take to your next project?
Oh gosh, so much. I think when I wrap production, I had a couple rules that I was thinking about recently. That my next film, I'm not gonna make in New York. I'm not gonna have any costumes, and I think the third might have to do with hair and makeup or something, or that everyone's gonna have shaved heads. I think what I learned and what I maybe knew going in is that just time is so valuable, and you need as much time as possible. Or I feel like that's when you can really experiment and you can really understand and take chances and make mistakes. So that said, I will obviously work with wardrobe and hair and makeup in my next film, but I don't think we'll be shooting in New York. I plan to make more films in this city because I love it here, but it can also just be logistically exhausting. And the next project I'm prepping right now takes place in kind of a near future, and it's in a science fiction realm, but it essentially provides me a clean palette to tell a story, which is really exciting, with no baggage or nostalgia of a place that I live, and really a palette that I can create things in a way that feels very new to me and exciting in that way. So, but what I learned was so much, but just the idea that to take advantage of time as much as possible. Not that I didn't on my first feature, but to just kind of plan for anything that isn't necessary as much as you can. But it's all going to battle.
Yeah, it goes out the window once you get on set.
Yeah.
Now I have one last question that I ask everyone I interview. We've been in this pandemic for over a year now. A lot of people are stuck inside depending on where they are in the world because of how bad it's broken out or what have you. And during that time, we all sort of discovered streaming services. They were there before, but we really discovered them at that point. Was there something you discovered over the past year, a movie or a show that you think people should check out on the streaming services?
Yeah, so much. I think there's going to be a renaissance in a way in movie making from this time and just the arts in general, of so many people just being, even though it felt like we were all kind of in a writer's residency in a way of being locked down. We also, I don't know, most people I talked to didn't actually create a lot, but now we're coming out, but certainly a lot of people came up with ideas. Streaming services, I'm a big proponent of the Criterion channel, and they ran a series during the pandemic on Albert Brooks' filmography, which I hadn't seen any of, and might be a surprise because it's such a different tone from the sort of work that I've made. But I just loved it. It's just pure joy. I got this poster from a friend during the pandemic because it had such an effect on me. But I would recommend, if viewers haven't seen Albert Brooks' work, just if you want pure escapism and pure comedy in a completely original way that has been inspired so much since then, I would recommend starting from the beginning and going through his 6 or 7 films.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you.
Of course. Thanks for having me. This was wonderful.
And of course, great. Best of luck on your next shoot, and keep us informed on how it goes.
Thanks very much.
All right. Talk to you later.